The primary message of the Bible can be summarized in 9 words. God formed us, sin deformed us, Jesus transforms us. That's the gospel in a nutshell. Now, the title of this 3-part series was You Are, You Will Become. Subtitled, To Become, You Must Be Undone. Once undone, God can redo. It's a character study on Simon Peter. If you missed the first 2, you can go back, and I'd hope you do that and listen to the first 2 so that you kind of have the full picture. But let's review. We started with where Simon met Jesus for the very first time. His brother Andrew brought him to meet Jesus. And at that point, we see this just, in my opinion, ridiculous exchange as far as an introduction is concerned. And that's where Jesus looks at him and he says, You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Peter. And at this point, I don't know what's going through Peter's head, right? What, you're changing my name. I'm just meeting you. Okay? But that begins this epic journey that we begin with Jesus and Simon. And I purported that what Jesus said to Simon in meeting him for the first time is exactly what he says to each one of us who he meets for the very first time. You are, you will become. You are who you are now. You're deformed, okay? But I formed you, and you're a compilation of a lot of different things. But my goal, if you follow me, is that I will make you into what you were created to be. That becoming part is really what Christianity is all about. Now, at that point, Simon began to just hang out with Jesus. He wasn't following him, he was just occasionally with him. Then we come to the next scene, which is where Simon's been fishing all night. He's a professional fisherman in business with his brother Andrew. And they fished all night. They've caught nothing. They're cleaning up their nets. Jesus is on the shore next to the boat, and he's teaching to the crowd. And Jesus asks Peter if he could preach on the boat. Simon says, okay, that's fine. He continues to clean up and while Jesus preaches. When Jesus is finished, he says to Simon, hey, notice you didn't catch anything. That's not good. Why don't you move out a little bit from shore and throw your nets out? Let's see what happens. Simon's like, you gotta be kidding me, please. Not only do we fish all night and catch nothing, but we've cleaned everything up. We know that the good fishing's only at night. What are you doing here? But he says, okay. And so at that point, they throw the nets over the side, and they catch so many fish, they have to bring another boat over to help them. Now, at this point, we said, what would Simon's reaction to this be? Well, you'd think he'd be jumping up, high-fiving Jesus, saying, that's the greatest thing ever. Would you please come into our fishing business with us? We'll break in at 51%. This is the best thing ever. We don't like fishing at night. 10 minutes in the morning. This is great. Okay, but that's not what happens. Instead, he throws himself to the deck of the boat on his knees. It says he's fearful, he's astonished, and he says literally to Jesus, get off my boat. Why would he say that? Well, because he's recognized God, a very God, is on his boat. How does he know that? Well, ordinary men don't tell fish to jump into a net. And so he's astonished, he's fearful, and yet Jesus' response to him is, don't be afraid, follow me. Don't be afraid, follow me. That phrase carries right into the next story that we see with Simon, and this is where they're on the boat during a storm. Jesus was supposed to be with them. He's not. They're long past the idea that he's going to show up. And here he comes walking on the water. They're scared to death. They think it's a ghost. And they cry out, and Jesus says, don't be afraid. It's me. And the last time Simon heard, don't be afraid, what followed it was, follow me. And I love this story because he sees this whole experience differently than any of the other disciples. They're still cowering in fear, and he's thinking, I wonder if I could participate in this miracle too. I wonder if it would be okay if I walked on the water, if Jesus would allow that. And so he does the un-Peter thing. He asks Jesus, is it really you? And asks permission. And Jesus says, yes, come. And it's feet out, get out and go. And he is walking on the water to Jesus. And then we know what happens. He takes his eyes off Jesus. He begins to lean on his own understanding. And he begins to sink. And I've mentioned that I've heard this message so many times, and the rest of the message is typically dwelling on his failure. But in reality, it says immediately, Jesus reached down, grabbed his hand, and pulled him back up. And then I asked the question, how do you think they got back out the boat? Think Jesus walked and Peter swam? As he lectured him the whole way on his lack of faith? I don't think so. I think arm in arm, they walked back to the boat. Then we see, I began to play on the interchange, which is fascinating, of how even though Jesus said he was going to change his name from Simon to Peter, it hasn't happened yet. Jesus is still calling him Simon. And you got to be wondering at this point, when is it going to happen? When's the big day? And then the big day happens. Jesus asked the disciples, who do others say that I am? And they began to list off a whole bunch of things. And then he says, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Peter, the rock. And it happens. And at that point, we get into this crazy back and forth of where he's either calling him Peter or he's calling him Simon. Why would he go back to Simon? Because we find Peter's got a blind spot. Peter's got a problem. He has a pride problem. Jesus at this point begins to tell them that he's going to be put to death. And every time he says that, Peter interacts and says, no, not on my watch. I won't allow that to happen. And his pride comes into play to the extent that Jesus then calls him, get behind me, Satan. You don't know my mission or what it's all about. And this leads us to where we left off, which is just the disastrous scene of Jesus being led off, and Peter's following at a distance, and he's in the courtyard, and Jesus had told him that he would deny him 3 times before the rooster crows, and of course Peter's not paying attention. Again, insists that would never happen. And Peter denies that he even knows him 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the rooster crows and he looks, and at that moment, Jesus is being led out with his face bloodied and spat upon through the colonnade, and he looks immediately and sees Peter. And so we ask, what was in that look? Was it a look of condemnation? I don't think so. I think it was a look of compassion. Jesus reminding Peter, I'm praying for you. Don't fail here. Don't fail me here. Hang in there. And that brings us to where we are this morning. Peter has unfinished business with Jesus. He left everything and he never looked back. However, his discipleship journey with Jesus is not going like he expected. I'm not sure what he expected, but it wasn't this. He's devastated. He's undone. Where does he go from here? Jesus is dead, and their ministry's over. After the death of Jesus, the disciples were in a state of confusion and fear. They feared persecution by the authorities who had crucified Jesus. But then their faith was revived after hearing that he might be alive. Some of the women had gone to the tomb and found the stone rolled away and Jesus' body missing. Suddenly 2 angels appeared and told them that he was alive. They rushed back and told the 11, quote, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed like nonsense. Though I'm sure they wanted to believe this Jesus is alive story, it just didn't make sense. But Peter would not allow time to pass before proving the story true or false. He immediately got up, it says, and he ran to the tomb. I love that. I believe Peter was more anxious than the others to resolve the mystery in the hope that should Jesus be alive, he could get the closure he so desperately needed. If Jesus is alive, he could possibly get the opportunity to tell him how sorry he was for denying him, to ask his forgiveness. But so far, it hadn't happened. It turns out Jesus is alive, and he's now appeared to the disciples 2 times. Think about that. Peter must be losing his mind. I'm confident that in both of the first 2 appearances, Peter tried somehow to get alone with Jesus so that he could apologize and ask forgiveness. But he wasn't successful. Would there be any more opportunities? What if the unthinkable happened and it never happened? This sets the stage for Peter's déjà vu experience. Déjà vu is where you experience something and a bell goes off in your head, reminding you that you've experienced this same thing before. Turn with me now to our text this morning, John 21. John chapter 21. The 21st chapter of John is one of my favorites because it's a déjà vu all over again experience that Jesus orchestrated exclusively for Peter. I love that Jesus recognized how devastated Peter was, and he devised this unique, it's happening again experience to restore their relationship. Verse 1, afterward Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon told them, and they said, we'll go with you. It's not surprising that Peter reverts to his former occupation of fishing. I'm sure he's thinking, well, what do I do now? Jesus, who they followed for 3 years, was crucified to their utter disbelief, which threw all of them into a tailspin because they were sure he would carry out their understanding of what things would be like when the Messiah returned, which was to overthrow Rome and replace it with Jewish dominance. But it's inevitable now. That's not going to happen. Everything was inside out and upside down. So let's go fishing. It's amazing to see how out of touch and clueless the disciples were about what Jesus came to accomplish. Even though Jesus told them repeatedly how wrong-headed they were, they continued to act like they knew his business better than he did. Reminds me of the story of the sheep herder in Australia. He's out on his property, which is thousands of acres, with his sheep. And he looks, and here comes a vehicle of some kind, cloud of dust behind it. And it gets closer and closer. He notices it's a black SUV, pulls up right next to him, tinted window comes down. Young man, sharply dressed, looks at him and says, "Are you a shepherd?" He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Let me ask you a question. If I can tell you exactly how many sheep you have, will you give me one?" The shepherd's like, "Okay, this has got to be good. Yeah, sure, I'll give you one." At that point, he fires up his laptop and triangulates it with his cell phone and a satellite. Pretty soon he's working through some Excel spreadsheets. He says, "You've got 1,743 sheep." The shepherd says, "That's correct. That's amazing. Go ahead and take one." So he gets out, he opens the back, he's bundling one up. The shepherd looks at him and says, Now let me ask you a question. He said, "If I can tell you exactly what you do, will you give me my sheep back?" He says, "Sure." He said, "You're a consultant." He says, "How did you know that?" Well, 3 things, real simple. Number 1, you showed up here, nobody asked you to. Number 2, you wanted me to pay you for the answer to a question I already know the answer to. And number 3, you don't know anything about my business. You took my dog. That's in essence what Jesus said to the disciples on numerous occasions. You don't know anything about my business. The disciples were constantly acting like the cocky consultant. Now they're confused and embarrassed, realizing they didn't get any of it right. So they fish all night, they catch nothing. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar. When did I hear that before? Oh yes, it's reminiscent of when Jesus asked to speak from the boat after he had fished all night and caught nothing. It's déjà vu all over again. It was now early in the morning, and I'm sure they were clearing their nets when they look up and they see someone on the shore they don't recognize. And Jesus hollers out, verse 5, friends, do you have any fish? No, they said. Jesus said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. When they did, they could not haul the net in because of the large number of fish. The text doesn't indicate that that Peter realized the irony of the déjà vu event, but I'm confident it'll come to him. Verse 7, then the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say it, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Peter was animated by John's affirmation that the man on the beach was in fact Jesus, because he immediately grabbed his garment and jumped into the water. He was anxious to get to Jesus as quickly as he possibly could. Verse 11 supports my theory that Peter is eager to meet Jesus, wanting to get closure with him. Jesus says, bring some fish you have just caught. Now, knowing this would need to be accomplished before he could proceed with anything with Jesus, it says, Peter dragged the net of 153 fish ashore. Let me tell you, that's no small feat. I'm not sure what a large fish in this instance would weigh. Let's say that each of the fish weighed an average of 2 pounds. That's 306 pounds of wet fish, not counting the weight of the net being dragged through water. Peter is anxious to get on with this closure opportunity. After all, this might be his only chance. Verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. I want to point out some specific details that often go overlooked so that you can fully understand the subtleties packed into this conversation where Jesus reinstates Peter. The first thing to notice is that Jesus once again called him Simon, the son of John. Ouch. Here we go again. Jesus begins by taking Peter back to the very first time they met. Why? I'm not sure. But I think he wants Peter to realize how far they've come and everything that's transpired between then and now. Now, there's a couple of options regarding Jesus, why Jesus asks, do you love me more than these? Based on translating this into English. One possibility is that Jesus says, do you love me more than these men? Or Jesus could be saying, do you love me more than these? The boat, the nets, the tackle, the fish, fishing. I've decided it's the first one. I believe Jesus' reference to these is the other disciples versus fishing. Some might push back on that, saying, I don't see Jesus asking a question where he's putting Peter on the spot, pitting him against the others for a response. But I think it fits perfectly with what Jesus is trying to get Peter to think through. Remember, Peter boldly told Jesus that even if these other guys were to abandon you, I would never do so. Is that not a statement of clearly, I love you more than all of these? With that in mind, Jesus flips the script, asking Peter, do you love me more than these? Is your love for me superior to theirs? Peter's prior statements of his unwavering devotion to Jesus compared to the other disciples happened with everyone present. So it's vital that this closure session between Jesus and Peter also occurs with everyone there. So Jesus' question to Peter takes him back to his former name, Simon, and back to reminding him of his bold, egotistical statements of superiority compared to the others. Now I want to point out the second often overlooked detail of this conversation. And it's easy to miss this. It's not readily apparent in the English translation. Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and John wrote this in Greek. In this case, the Greek translation is critical to understanding the different uses of the word love. In the Greek language, there are different words for love, each representing a different type of love. 4 of these are used in the Bible. They are as follows. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. Storge. Storge is a familial love, the affectionate bond that exists between family members. Phileo. Phileo is translated as friendship or affectionate love between friends or colleagues. The city of Philadelphia is known as the city of brotherly love. Eros, from which we get the English word erotic. This is a romantic love or a sexual attraction. And finally, agape. Agape is an unconditional or selfless love that is an act of the will. It's a self-sacrificing love that seeks the best for others without expecting anything in return. Now, when teaching in these different definitions of love, I always interject a word picture for each to help people remember what they stand for. My word picture for storge is a full hugging embrace. With one arm, I'm sure most of you did a lot of this during the holidays with family. The word picture for phileo is shoulder to shoulder with one arm around the other, which is typical of a buddy-buddy relationship. For eros, the word picture is a man and a woman in full embrace, kissing each other, mouth to mouth. But here's where things take a turn. The word picture for agape is a lone man or woman kneeling, head bowed, praying. Why this? To drive home that humans cannot produce agape love apart from God's help. It's God's love and unique to Him. He owns it. The only way for us to agape love someone is if God is doing it through us. So 2 words, agape and phileo, are used in this dialogue between Jesus and Peter. Understanding where and by whom they are used adds a whole nother dimension to the depth of this conversation. When Jesus asks Peter with the first question, "Do you truly love me?" he asks, "Do you agape love me?" This is huge. The new NIV translation took out truly, which is a big mistake because it seriously deflates the power, the impact of what's happening here. Once again, Jesus, calling him Simon, asks Peter if he agape loves him more than these. In other words, do you selflessly, sacrificially, and unconditionally love me more than these other men? Peter's answer to this question is very telling. Telling of the fact that his previous self-inflated pride has sufficiently humbled him. Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I phileo love you." Wait a minute, what just happened here? Peter answered to the question in a way that's different than how the question was asked. Jesus asks if he agape loves him, and Peter answers, "You know that I am your friend." With his braggadocious statements earlier, Peter had said in no uncertain terms in front of everyone that he agape loved Jesus. But when it all played out, and catch this, this is how serious this is, he couldn't even admit that he was his friend. He denied knowing him 3 times. And Jesus' response to this, 3 words, "Feed my lambs." Verse 16, again Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. Now notice that Jesus' second question is the same in one respect, but different in another. He still calls him Simon, but now asks Peter if he phileo loves him. Simon, are you my friend? Simon responds to this, yes, Lord, you know that I'm your friend, Peter says. And to this, Jesus says, take care of my sheep. Peter has been undone, broken, and humbled to the point of understanding something significant about himself. Extreme self-confidence does not give you the power and strength to do the impossible. Peter says, Jesus, I know you know me better than I know myself. You know that I am your friend. You mean everything to me. I owe you my life. I am your friend. But I cannot and will not say that I will never disappoint you again. I will not promise that I will never deny you again. I am human. You taught me that I can do anything with your help, even walk on water. And I've learned that equal to the miracle of walking on water is the miracle of agape love. I cannot do it on my own. It must come from you. This brings us to the final round of this Q&A closure. Jesus asks again, Simon, are you my friend? At this point, it says Peter's hurt and insulted by Jesus asking him this again. Well, Peter, I'll bet you not as hurt and insulted as Jesus was when you denied that you even knew him 3 times after being his companion for 3 years. Jesus then repeated, verse 17, feed my sheep. He then tells Peter what lies ahead at the end of his life. Hopefully Simon is listening this time. It's a very sad and humbling prophecy telling Peter, the rock, that he will eventually lose control of his life and be led to where he doesn't want to go. But through it all, Peter will glorify God. Then the final benediction to Jesus' restoration. 2 simple words that Peter was more than familiar with. The exact 2 words that began his epic journey with Christ. Follow me. We've now come full circle. Attached to the end of the 3 questions was a command. It's stated differently each time, but all with the same meaning. Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. Jesus is in essence saying, Peter, you thought that my business as the Messiah was all about a kingdom where we would be served as royalty. But you don't know anything about my business. As I told you often, I did not come to serve, but to be served. Not come to be served, but to serve. Now it's your turn. Jesus had poured his life into these men, and after carrying out his earthly ministry in only 3 years, he is going to leave everything in the future in the hands of this still rough, around the edges, ragtag group of men. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. Of course, Jesus knew something that they would soon find out. None of it would work absent the coming of the Holy Spirit. That was the secret sauce, the power behind it all, the power necessary to build the kingdom of God. In closing, I can't end without enjoying a good laugh at the rest of Peter's discussion with Jesus. You'd think Peter would just keep quiet at this point. No, classic Peter. He immediately can't help sticking his nose into someone else's business. Verse 20, Peter turned and saw that John was following them. When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? What about the end of his life? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? You must follow me. Not content with knowing the end of his own story, his curiosity was killing him concerning how John's life might end. And I love Jesus' straightforward answer. What's it to you? It's none of your business. Why do you care if I want him to live until I return? Peter couldn't go 60 seconds without falling back into the trap of comparing himself to others. It's such a common human trait. One last time, Jesus emphasizes to Peter the most important thing he must do above all else. You must follow me. And so it is with each of us as God's chosen disciples. So, brothers and sisters, as you begin this new year, 2025, above all else, simply follow Jesus. Remember that it's much better to be a follower who fails than one who fails to follow. God formed you, sin deformed you, Jesus will transform you. You are, you will become. Follow Jesus and be confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. God's not finished with you yet. Let's pray.